Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Editing Your Draft panel. For those of you who may not know me, because my name doesn't indicate it there, this is Delvius, and the other two panelists we have here can introduce themselves.
Ooh, so I am Sim, and you probably see me around. I'm the very cynical mod that everyone kind of likes ripping into for no reason. So yes, that's me.
But you make it so easy.
I
That's
don't
why we
make
like
it
to.
easy. I just say something, and then all of a sudden, you're gang up on me for no reason. It's enough about me. Enough about me.
All
Let's
right,
go to the other panels.
all right.
Hey, my name is Elliot, and I am an author. I don't really have a lot going on.
That's all right. What's your name on the server, just so people might be able to recognize you?
It's gonna be Elliot J. Claire. But if for whatever reason you're looking for me by my username's Jasmine Nancy.
All right, nice. And Audrey, you are in the presence of three other people, or four,
Yes.
and we're gonna start with the panel. So, I guess I'll just start by asking, I think, a question that anyone who's editing your draft probably asks themselves at one point, and this is actually, I think, a question that comes from you, Elliot. So, I'm going to address this to you. Do you actually have a go-to method that you use to tackle editing? And if you do, what is it? Because I think everyone approaches editing very differently. It might help everyone to know what exactly it is you do, because there might be something from that that they can take. What's editing like for you? What's the editing process?
Yeah, actually, I have a really specific way that I edit.
Specific.
Yeah, so I didn't realize that not everyone has a way that they edit every single book, but I
Mm.
edit every single book the same way. Um, so maybe that's just part of me being
Haha.
nerd spicy, which is totally fine. But so I have a set way. Let me pull it up. It's short, it's not like long, but there are 6 levels of editing that I do. So I do
Six
a
levels.
structural edit,
Okay.
which is turning it book shaped. Okay, so I take all the words that I wrote and I basically try to plop them into chapters and, you know,
Mm.
kind of make it
Right.
look like a book. And I move scenes around as needed. I make sure it mostly has the correct rise and fall. And then I do a character edit. So I make sure that all the character arcs are moving in the right direction.
Mm.
Then I do a world edit. So I'm adding all the fun details, like what they're wearing. I edit them like the way that they're getting around. I make sure that there's no missing pieces. So like if I mention
Hmm.
a chair in one scene and then suddenly there's no chair in the next scene, I like edit all
Yeah.
that stuff. Then I do scene level editing, which is going through each scene and making sure that it's pushing the plot in the direction that I want it to go, demonstrating character, not spending too much time in one place, getting into the scene and out of the scene at the right time, and just like being beneficial overall to the book. And I
Mm.
do nuance editing, which is looking at the teeny tiny details, showing, not telling, making sure subtext is on page. I'm probably deleting a lot of stuff at this point. And then after that, I read through my entire book. I leave notes as I go, and then I edit my book backwards from the last chapter to the first chapter to make sure that I haven't missed anything.
Mm.
And
Ba-
then I do line edits for like commas and, continuity and word choices. And then my
Ah,
book is done.
okay. Wow, okay. If you don't mind me saying, that's a very systematic self-editing process. Um, I think that's the most thorough self-editing process that I've ever heard about. But I think it makes sense, at least as you listed down the steps. I do have one quick question about the second to the last step there, which is you edit it backwards. So, so you basically read say the last chapter first, and then the second to the last, and then you keep going back
Yes,
until you read the first chapter.
exactly.
How does that work exactly? Like,
So
wouldn't it make more? I don't know. Like, wouldn't you be able to catch any errors better if you did it from beginning to end? But how does doing it end to beginning work for you?
so I did it on accident one time. I like edited this book. Obviously, I'm basically telling you that I edit my book 6 times.
Hmm.
And a lot of the steps I do together, especially the smaller ones where you're working on like continuity and you're working on like, adding fun details. If I'm catching things as I'm moving, I may shorten the edits to like 4 times instead of 6. But I got really bored editing this book and I had a really strict deadline. I needed
Hmm.
to send it over um, to my editor for like a final proofread. And I wasn't done and I could not force my brain to do it. And I was like, okay, what if I just read this last chapter first, which I never do?
Hmm.
And I did read the last chapter and it was cool because it was like, okay, this is the end of the arc. And then I kind of like stair stepped down from the book with each chapter. So the book has like 26 chapters. So I did chapter 26 and addressed all the notes that I had left for myself when I read it through, the correct way. And then I did
Right.
chapter 25 and I was like, wow, I actually found a continuity error this way that I wouldn't have found the other way around. And I was like, this might be beneficial. And so I kept going and going and going. And I found so many things that felt odd reading it backwards that I would have never caught reading it forwards because I had the context when I read it forwards.
All right. That's fascinating. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. the, what about you, Sim? Do you have an editing process that works for you? It might be very different from what Elliot just
Very
described.
much improvisational, to be fair. I would say for me, so usually because I tend to, what is it, do edit chapters into separate documents. So if I'm going to do another draft, instead of like editing the draft on the same document, I end up having to, what is it? I have like a master draft, which is where I put all the chapters in together, but individually I end up making a second document for a specific chapter. So,
Hmm.
and then there's also another document that I make where I basically write essentially basically it's where I write the chapter before I actually put it on the actual chapter document. The reason why is because I'm trying to be wary of word count during this process. So
Right.
when I'm editing a chat, so if I have it's kind of more of a psychological thing. It like if I'm very careful of how I write the what is it the specific I have to specific scenes I guess set a certain goal for a word count goal before I put them onto like what is it the main document which has the chapter on
Right.
and yeah basically I have to try to make sure I don't go over like 3K words. That's why I get depressed. If you ever see me in story if I get annoyed like because that's basically because I've messed up.
Uh-huh.
I've went over that limit that I wanted. So usually, so I've like technically it's like I have several documents before just for a second draft. So it's so I've yeah to break it down, I have the master document for the draft. I put all the chapters together. I have another document that is specifically for that chapter I'm editing. And then I got another document, which is where I basically experiment with all the pros and whatnot just to reach the word count limit. And
Okay.
so, yeah, that's how it goes. I always do this afterwards because, like, I learned when I was doing my first draft, editing as you go, you don't stop editing, and then you don't end up finishing the draft, which is
Uh-huh.
exhausting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's basically that. It's not as organized as like Elliot's, but that's literally how I go go about with
All right.
mine.
No, that's all good. Actually, I think you and I have a similar editing process because if you open my Google Docs and for my stories, I have what I call the master doc for each story, which is like the roughly final version of all of the chapters one after the other. But before any chapter can make it into there, I have separate docs for each chapter, and I have actually various versions of it. Oh, this is the version of this chapter where that person commented. This is the version of that chapter where this person commented, and I kind of aggregate them all into one master file for that chapter before then I copy paste it and then put it in the master doc for the whole story. Um, and how do you find that? So this is something for the both of you now. How do you find that your editing process actually helps you with your writing? Do you feel that it's been serving you well, or do you think you could do with a change?
Hmm. Ah, you really caught me there. I would say, I mean, so far it's worked to an
Mhm.
extent, I think.
To an extent.
Yeah, to an extent, yeah. Uh, I would say because for me, because I outline a lot before, so
Mm,
it's not necessarily I'm worried about the structure or the beats and whatnot. I usually try to carefully do that before I even write the first draft. For me,
right.
when it comes to editing, it's because I'm an overwriter. When I edit, I'm caring more about the amount of words that are going into the thing. And I would say it works sort of, but it doesn't work as efficiently as I want it to be,
Okay.
I guess. Because
Yeah, that's
like
fine. That's fine.
I end up overpassing the limits I set for myself
Ah.
quite a lot of times, so it gets a bit annoying. So yeah.
Okay. And what about you, Elliot? Do you find that your editing process works really well for you, or are there things about it that you'd change, but maybe you just haven't gotten around to?
Um, it's constantly evolving. And also it depends on the draft because not every draft is gonna need um to have scenes moved around. So I'm a planter, so I'm
Hmm.
not sometimes I plan enough to have everything, you know, really good, and that's great. I love when that happens for me. And
Hmm.
sometimes I'm a really big pantser, and then I have to go back and be like, oh my God, what did I write? Um,
Mm,
but ultimately, I am a chronic underwriter, so terribly bad. Um, so a lot of my steps when I edit are just so I hit the word count target that I'm looking for. So, like,
right.
for example, my book that I'm currently editing right now, actually, um, it was about 45 or 40,000 words, and when I'm done, it's going to be about 60. So I was about 15,000 short. Yeah, so um, yes and no. It just kind of depends on what I'm doing. My current book right now, I am hitting every single editing bullet point that I mentioned
Right.
because I pantsed that one so hard and it's missing so much. So it just depends.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I think that actually is a nice transition to another question we have here that's from one of you. Is it actually best to edit during the drafting process or after? Because from the way it sounds with you, Elliot, you're doing it most editing after you've already written the entire story. Whereas I think for you and me, Sim, we may be editing the story as we go along as well. So what do you guys think? Which is it?
Oh,
Which is better?
after.
After? After? Okay, I guess I'm the one who
Yeah,
does it during.
yeah,
Oops.
after. If you're doing it after, because you need a break from your story for a while. You
Mm,
do like if you're editing during the process, there's a risk you'll end up kind of the tunnel vision. Tunnel vision becomes more skewed because then you won't be able to notice the issues in the heat of the moment. Because while you're editing, you're also trying to get your draft done at the same time.
right,
Whereas if you're doing it after either the draft is done and you're giving yourself a break between now and then, you'll be able to see what works and what didn't work with a much clearer head. That's for me anyway. I'm not sure how that works with other people, but yeah, after's for
right.
me.
Yeah, I've definitely fallen prey to that tendency that you just mentioned, where I become obsessed with trying to make the chapter perfect, not realizing that there are probably bigger issues I should pay attention to before before being a perfectionist with each chapter. But what about you, Elliot? What do you think? Editing during or after the drafting process?
I used to edit during, and I never finished a single book. I have a strict rule for myself that I'm not allowed to even go back and reread what I've written unless I pants too close to the sun, in which case I have to go back and reread what I've written and figure out where I've gone astray. And I
Mm,
try not to do that. I do try to write down at least the bullet point of like where I think my story is going, kind of like what I want the story to be, where I want to end. I never start a book without knowing at least where I want the book to end. But
mm.
occasionally, especially in the middle bits, I do get off track and then I will edit or even delete. I try to cut no more than like 500 to 1,000 words. But no, almost always I edit after.
No, okay. That's probably for the best. I think I should have taken your advice years ago, but I didn't have that advice because no one talked to me about these things. But yeah, here we are now at least. Hmm. So actually, with regards to like editing, obviously a big part of that is editing with based on feedback, not just that our eyes tell us when we read the story again, but feedback that other people give us as well. That is to say, beta readers. So I have another question for the two of you, and that is actually, how do you actually find beta readers, and how have you handled their feedback? Is there a system that you have in place there for finding and then handling feedback from beta readers?
Yeah,
Mm,
actually. So I get beta readers from two places. One
Mm,
of those is the writing community that I'm part of.
mm, mm,
And I have a lot of writing friends, and we do a lot of beta swaps. They write a book, I write a book, we swap it. It's a good time.
mm.
Um, that's one of the places I will say I get less beta readers from there, but it is always an option. Make friends, have them read it. I send it off
Yep.
to like actual real life friends too, and that's great. But a lot of the feedback I get from real life people is just, oh my God, your book was so good. And then no,
Yeah. I wonder why that's always the case when you meet them in
every
person. They're like,
single time.
yeah, it's like, oh, your book was so good, and then you're like, great. So, what did you think about
Yes,
it? Oh, it was so good. I loved it. Yeah,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I think they
why?
just don't want to break your heart or whatnot, so they try to be supportive to not be as blunt.
Mm,
Potentially. Yeah, I actually don't know why they do that. But yes, I've encountered that in the wild. So I tend to not have my friends beta read my books anymore just because
mm.
it's not beneficial. I mean, unless I need someone to tell me that my book is good, you know. But
Right.
and then the other place that I get beta readers is from social media. I'll put out like a beta reading call and I'll say if anyone wants to read this, sign up, and people do sign up and they read it and it's great. And then in terms of what I do with all of that feedback, I actually get all of it, okay? And I put it together. I don't know who has said what, and I put it in a Google Sheets document and
Uh-huh.
I file it in by like category. So is this a grammar thing? Is this a plot thing? Is there a plot hole? That's very serious. Those get marked
Mhm.
separately. And
Right.
then I just address them one by one. There are some things that I try to see if they overlap. So like if four people came back and said, hey, you did this, that's very serious. I'm going to address that first. But if
Right.
someone has an opinion and they say, hey, I don't like this, that's going to go pretty low on the priority list just because I like to order things based off of what I feel is most important.
Mhm.
Um, and then also, I feel like it's important to say that sometimes beta readers come back with very strong opinions, and I will actually try to parse out the feedback from the opinion before I log it in my spreadsheet because some people are really mean and or
Right.
some people just don't vibe with the genre that you wrote and they're going to say some things that are really horrible. And it has nothing to do with your writing. So like I had
Mm.
someone tell me the other day that they thought my or they hated every single one of my main characters.
Oh, did they?
They did. They told me they hated my entire book. They would have never read it, and that they hated all of my main characters and that they weren't believable. And I was
Wow,
like, wow, that's
that's pretty harsh.
yeah. I was like, that's really mean. I wish you just wouldn't have beta read my book. But in their hatred, they
In
said a
their
few
hatred.
things that were
Uh-huh.
extremely important. So I put aside their opinions of what they said, and I actually took the constructive things that ended up being really important and have made changes to my book with those things. So if you're ever blindsided by a really horrible piece of feedback, there's usually some good bits in there too.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. Because I've experienced that once or twice where you have some extremely horrible feedback. But beneath it, beneath the vitriol, you can tell that there's some thought in there that you should probably pay attention to. Um, yeah, but it's just been it's been such a I get it's hard to see the forest for the trees in those kinds of situations.
It really is. Definitely take it with a grain of salt. I actually have never put beta feedback in a different spreadsheet, but I did put their feedback in a different spreadsheet. And I
Mm,
kind of picked through it to see what I agreed with and what I didn't. Um, and I almost never pick through what I agree with and what I don't. I just kind of take it at face value and either discard it or address it. But yeah, that one I really sat down and was like, okay, you know, do I actually feel like my characters are unlikable? Because everyone else has said how much they like my characters, how believable they are, how sweet they are. And so it's just like this one random person who was like, yo, I hate your book. So,
uh-huh.
you got to pick through and not get your feelings hurt or throw it out altogether if you really need to. So,
Yeah. All right. Thank you. That's very systematic. And what about you, Sim? What's your process for finding beta readers and feedback?
Well, I was supposed to, what is it? This September, I was meant to have beta readers reading one of my first one of my first projects. However, due to the fact that Microsoft decided to block my account for some, I mean, basically my OneDrive, I don't have access to my OneDrive until this whole thing is sorted. So this whole thing
Oh,
has been delayed. Yeah, I know. So,
terrible.
so I had to work on another project in the meantime. But generally, so it would have been my first experience with beta readers had this thing gone correctly if Microsoft didn't decide to be idiots.
Okay.
So instead, I usually use critique, and whatnot. So beta readers I got from online, so Instagram.
Hmm.
So I made friends with people online. I have a critique partner online as well from Instagram, and we exchange. It's like every week we exchange chapters. I have feedback from her, and then I have feedback from Story Valley, but I haven't been on Story Valley's critique sessions in a while
Yeah,
because the whole.
I was gonna ask if you you were in one of our critique groups.
I
I
mean,
guess
I was
that
from critique group A, but then I had to stop because then I was gonna, prioritize my. But back then, I was gonna prioritize my first project, get the beta read, and I wasn't gonna go back to critique until September. But
mm,
now I'm probably gonna have to go to critique a bit earlier, but I don't want to at the same time. But it's a whole process. But yeah, so it's critique and yeah, for me. For
mhm.
me, because I'm a very sensitive soul, so I kind of take comments very personally. I had
Oh
to
yeah.
take so I had to kind of slowly over the last 2 years be able to kind of decipher what is an opinion and what is a
Uh,
fact, an objective fact.
so you
If it's
had
an
to like
opinion,
grow a thick skin
I
essentially.
had to grow. Yeah, so if someone doesn't like it, it doesn't like it, or doesn't like whatever, or they say this doesn't make sense. You have to find if it's a common denominator amongst other people. If it's a common denominator amongst other people, then yes, I will change it. If it's just
Uh-huh.
you, I'm not listening. I'm really like I hear you, but
Uh-huh. But
that's it sounds more like a preference thing, more than
yeah.
an actual criticism. Because like one person can like this thing, can hate this thing, but then a bunch of other people like this element. So it's like trying not to listen to that one negative comment or
Mm,
and whatnot.
mm, yeah.
Unless what
That
they
makes
say is definitely something that I did not recognize and other people didn't recognize, and the people other recognize, like, oh yeah, that is actually pretty wonky. And if they start
hmm
agreeing, and I'll concede as well that there's a
hmm
flaw in the whole structure or whatever it is they pointed out, then I'll fix it. So it's
Okay.
mostly nowadays just deciphering what do I take. So I had to take everything with a grain of salt unless it's objectively an
Object
issue.
yeah, objectively an issue. Okay,
Yeah, that's
that sounds
actually
good.
why I compile all my feedback because I am very tender and
Oh,
I definitely sometimes cry over feedback. Like when someone came back and was like, "Hey, your book sucks." Like I definitely cried over that and I debated throwing away all of their feedback. I'm really glad now that I didn't. But yeah, no. I also am very sensitive. I think most people are.
yeah. And if they're not, well, they've had to develop a thick skin over time.
Yes.
All right. Thank you both for that. I think your process can definitely be of use to some people, especially for those who haven't participated in like groups like this before. They might not know how to go about actually finding places to have this feedback. Which I guess leads me to my next question. Now, you could say that beta readers are in a way, um, well, they're not really editors, but they help you with the editing process, but they're not professionals about it. So I think one thing that a lot of people overlook, or they don't really ask themselves at the start of their writing journey is, do I need an editor? And I think it might benefit most people if they did get an editor. But I guess the question here is, do you guys believe that an editor is necessary for the writing process?
Yes, yes, definitely, yes, please.
Definite,
Uh,
definitely.
it is a definite, yeah, because I think you need those extra eyes to help you.
Mm,
I think
mm,
the only
mhm.
issue for me with editing is it's just expensive. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
just,
yeah, 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 yeah.
that's the only problem. Like if editors were if they was a, if it was a bit more if I was in a more secure financial place for an editor, I would gig editors all the time. But like
Uh-huh.
because I do like it's I need someone to kind of I need so because I do what is it video editing as well. So I need kind of so I generally have feedback from people who I send this stuff to and other senior editors who'd be like, no, take this out, take this out. So and they do help with kind of honing in with videos I do.
Uh-huh.
So with the same for writing, because I'm a person that writes a lot more than I should. I what is it? I need kind of like someone to be like, yeah, take this out, or this looks nice or not. I need a more an objective view of the thing. Like I could try and self-editing as much as I can, as many times as I want, go to critique sessions as many times as I want. But at the same time, I'm still going with the lens of my with my
Your your
perspective.
your your own your own
Yeah,
biases,
yeah,
essentially.
exactly. So we're having an editor. It's kind of like being splashed with water, cold
Ah,
water. Yeah. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. And sometimes that's what you need. You need to be splashed in the face with cold water.
Oh, definitely.
So
All right.
kind of the same for me, but also a little different. So I actually have an editor and I try to rely on them as little as possible because
Oh, okay.
money, like you
Money.
said, yep, it is expensive. Now, if you're going to do traditional publishing, you're not paying for an editor, of course, and that's a totally different story altogether. But for me personally, I'm doing, indie publishing or self-publishing, depending on how you look at it. And so for me, I have to pay out of pocket.
Mhm,
It's actually
mhm,
one of the reasons that I am so strict with the way that I edit, because I have found that when I edit it that way, if I have to send it off to my editor, the only feedback that I'm getting at that point is actually the valuable feedback that you're looking for.
mhm.
It is the stuff like, hey, I don't think your character would do this. It's not so much like, hey, your structure's off, or hey, like, I don't think this is the right character arc. Like I've already addressed all of those things, but I'm actually getting
Right.
down to the nitty gritty. So,
Mhm.
yes, an editor is important, but also if you can find good beta readers who give good feedback and you're very strict with the way that you edit, and also, um, like for me, when I edit backwards, that's almost like I'm looking at my book with a new set of eyes, like
Uh-huh.
very fresh. The book is totally different that direction. I don't know why. It's like a brain hack. So On one hand, yes, I feel like an editor is really important, especially if you have unlimited money and you can get an editor and then they can do revisions and then you can do proofs and so on and so
Uh-huh.
forth. But if you can't do that, then not necessarily always. So I don't stress if I can't afford to get my book edited professionally.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's that's a new take on it, because most people I've spoken with are usually either no, you don't need an editor, or yes, you definitely need an editor, but not something more measured like this. So kudos for the novel take.
thanks.
And speaking of you, because I'm going to touch this or relate this to the point you mentioned there at the end, which is if you can find good beta readers. So good is qualitative; it's going to mean different things to different people. But as it relates to editors, how do you find a good editor for you? Like, how do you determine that? That is to say, how do you find a beta reader that works for you? Oh, sorry, an editor. Everything I said there is for editors. How do you find an editor that works good for you, like someone who understands you?
For me personally, I looked for someone that I really jived with.
Uh huh.
I looked around a lot all over the internet. I asked friends if they had recommendations. I spent quite a bit of time looking for an editor. I went on TikTok and looked at,
TikTok.
yeah, I went on TikTok and looked at editors speaking about the way that they edit and kind of looked for what the standard was. So
Mhm.
that way I kind of knew what I was looking for because I had no idea, right? I mean, you can read 6,000 editor biographies and look at their websites, and it doesn't really tell you much. So I
Uh huh.
was trying to do research on what I was looking for. I know for me personally, I was looking for someone who was really nice, someone who absolutely would not destroy my feelings during
Right.
edits. But I also didn't want someone who would comment and be like, oh, I love this section, because I don't need that. I'm going to assume if they didn't touch it, then they liked it. Um,
Mm,
I know some people do love that and they love when their editor gets back with them and they'll leave notes like, oh my God, this is so cute, or like, oh, why didn't they kiss, or, so on and so
yeah.
forth. And that's really cute and that works for some people. But for me, if I'm going to spend the money, I don't need you to comment on what you thought was good. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair. Although
Yeah.
some people might say that it's okay if they comment on what's good, because at least now you know to do more of that in the future.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Which is cute, and I don't disagree with that at all. It's just for me, I feel like I'm getting a bigger bang for my buck if I'm only getting feedback on what I need to change. And with that said, my editor still did give me a couple pieces of like, oh my God, that was cute, or hey, this works really well. And that's great. I knew it worked well. She validated that. And, you know, it was cool. But actually, I looked for an editor specifically. The reason I chose my editor is because the way that they look at writing aligns with the way that I write. So I knew that I would be a good fit for them. And in
Right.
turn, when they did the 10-page sample and came back with feedback, I knew that they were a great fit for me too.
Okay. Sounds good. And you, Sim, what's your take on this?
I'm not even reached that level yet, so I can't
Uh,
necessarily answer something like that because I'm still nah. Yeah, no, I don't actually have an answer for that because I've not
oh, you
actually
don't?
experienced that before. No, no, not actually experienced that before. But I would say when it comes to searching for editors, I think I was more like along the lines of just searching on what genre they do,
Uh
or
huh.
because like different, like if you're getting an editor who does thriller and you're doing an edited and you have a fantasy story, they're probably going to not be as invested as much because
Mm,
it's not necessarily their forte or their taste, I'd say. um so when it comes to like editors, I think it's more or less kind of searching their interests, and you can actually find
right.
them like because on interests on their pages and whether or not you think they'd be better suited for your story. Because if they like fantasy, then there's a high chance they'll probably go in with that kind of mindset with editing
Yeah.
a story
Yep.
because they they like that genre, so you can kind of discuss a bit. It's a lot easier to relate to. Whereas if you're going with
Mhm.
someone who doesn't really specialize in that, then the feedback, I mean, like, because it'll be outside of their genre, you could make the argument that they would have a much more objective opinion on it, but
Yeah.
but what they will may ask for you to do may not relate to what genre your genre that you're doing, or
Right.
it won't benefit it because they're not necessarily, they don't understand that genre as well as they as well, yeah, don't understand the genre, so they'll make choices that will go against that, or yes, yeah. At the end of the day, it's basically trying to figure out what is learning about the editors themselves before I decide to go and probably choose what is it
Mhm.
pick an editor. It's like if you
Right.
know what their interests are, what they like, what books they read, and obviously editors, they also write stories as well. So for the stories
Uh-huh.
that they're writing, you can what is it? Then yeah, that's where I would make my choices from.
Okay. That's good. All right. And I think all of the things, excuse me, that you two have just mentioned to me touches kind of on this last question that I have here, which is, why do you guys think an editor is necessary? You know, we've alluded to it in various points of your different answers here, something about objectivity and all of that. But for you personally, why do you think an editor, since you both agree that having an editor is necessary in some capacity, why do you believe that?
Oh, still me. Why do I feel like I mentioned before? It's basically having another set of eyes
Hmm.
around you, because like it's basically the job, like in for film, like in filmmaking, the editor video editing, you basically cleaning up you're cleaning up, trimming off the fat, or trying to ensure that the director's vision, what is it, is being presented to the best it can be. And
Hmm.
so with an editor, as a video editor, you have to, what is it? Yeah, you have to kind of, what is it? You have to have this sense of, you have to be quite ruthless. But at the end of the day, you also have to remember that this is the director's vision. So you also
Right.
have to, it's director's vision. So what you're trying to do, you just want to do what's best for the director, what's best for their story. And if the director says, I want to keep this, then you keep that. And so
Hmm.
there's nothing else you could do. And in the same way as a writing editor for writing, I think they would probably go with that mindset. They're there just to make sure the story is better.
Hmm.
Try to, at the end of the day, they understand that this is your vision, so it's quite nice to have someone who wants to support you to make sure that vision that you're making, or that vision that you're upholding, is
Uh-huh.
clear to you and to the audience. And so yeah, I'd say that it's important because it's like writing is a very lonely process, so you can't you
Yeah.
feel alone for a lot of the time, and there's no one that you can actually rely on. So like having someone who's in that same field trying to help boost you up is nice, I
Hmm.
would say. So
Hmm. Okay. Thank you. And what about you, Elliot? Do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, so in my day job, I'm actually a software engineer. And one of the things that we do in software engineering, it's very similar to writing a book, which seems very odd, but it is. You pick up a ticket, all right? You start to write the code and you do it by yourself. It's extremely lonely. You finish it up, you create a merge request, which is when you ask to basically publish it. And then you have people come in and they read it and they give you feedback on it. So it's kind of the same idea when it comes to writing a book. I think it's important to have other people, basically unbiased third parties, come in and read your work, whether that is paying for an actual editor, whether that is a beta reader or an ARC reader. We know what's going on in our book inside our head. And so a
Hmm.
lot of times we write with those things inside our head, or at least I do. Maybe if you're a number
Uh-huh.
writer, you don't get this problem as much. But I personally run into the issue where I will write something knowing that something is true, except I've never actually written that down. And so then a reader will come in and be like, hey, why is this person doing, XYZ? They need more
Mhm.
backstory. And then I'm like, oh man, I never even mentioned that they, they did that thing, or like this happened to them, or this is why they don't know what's going on. And so it's important to have people to come in and say, hey, you've forgotten this. And
Mhm.
that's why it's so
Mhm.
important. And it's also another reason, I hate to say it again, why I've been reading things backwards recently is because it's almost like I'm seeing where I've messed up because I've
Right.
never read my story backwards. So it's almost like I am then a new independent third party
A new.
because
Uh-huh.
your story forwards is one way, but your story backwards is totally different. It's actually crazy. You should try it sometime.
Uh-huh.
And I've told friends and they've done it and they're like, wow, that actually works. And I'm like, yeah, it does. I mean, it was just something that I did to force my brain to edit. But yeah, it's actually become a really powerful tool on my tool belt. So,
Hmm.
yeah, just independent third parties are important in everything. So I think that carries over into writing as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's actually extremely insightful. Especially with, I have to try this editing backwards thing that you mentioned. I don't quite believe it just yet, but I mean, if it works for you, then it might work for other people as well, like some people in our audience, or maybe even some of the other panelists here. It might work for them. It might, possibly, possibly. All right. So one last, a bit of time here. We still have a bit of time. And actually, I want to try to dedicate that time to if anyone in the audience has any questions. So, does anyone have any questions? Okay, I'm going to take that as a tentative no. But does anyone else here have any points that they'd like to bring up? Any last points from the discussion? Okay.
I will bring
Yeah.
up one thing, all right?
Yes.
And that's in terms of financial limitations. If you
Uh-huh.
want an editor, in my semi unprofessional professional opinion,
Uh-huh.
if you had to pay for one stage of editing and you could not afford to do any more, I would pay for developmental.
I was
Developmental
about to
edits.
say that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Because I can line edit all day, right? I mean, it's like the tedious bit. I mean, you throw it into Google or throw it into whatever. Maybe you pay for an editing software. I personally have Pro Writing Aid, and that catches a lot of like the comma splices and whatever, right?
Hmm.
Um, I can't throw it into Pro Writing Aid and have it developmental edit for me.
Right. Yeah.
So for
That makes
me, if
sense.
I had to pay for something, it would be a developmental edit on my already edited book.
Hmm. Hmm.
I would write it,
And
I would edit it, and then I would send it off for a developmental.
And for anyone who might not be familiar with the term developmental edit, can you give a brief explanation of what you would consider a developmental edit?
Um, so I think a developmental edit is going to be like it focuses on like your manuscript as a whole. So like your story, your message, your arguments, kind of your characters. It is the thing that looks at the meatiest parts of your book and kind of tries to poke holes in them.
Hmm.
And that's why it's the most important, in my opinion. Like if you truly can only afford one thing, like that's what I want feedback on. I don't want feedback on necessarily even my prose because that changes as I edit and I can really lock into that, when I'm nearing the end of edits.
Right.
But I want the feedback on, does this make sense?
Hmm.
Are my characters actually being individuals or do they kind of lump together? That's the feedback that I want.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to get that definition out, just in case anyone here wasn't super familiar with it. And yeah, actually, at this juncture, I believe that's this session because we are at about 1 hour. And unless anyone else has any points they want to bring up or any questions they want to ask, that more or less covers everything. So, hello.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you both, Elliot and Sim, for your time. It was really insightful. I definitely feel like there are a few things here that I could try as well. But I think that the editing stuff backwards is going to be the thing that I'll actually try out first. Okay. So thank you for that. And Blue, are you still there?
I am. Thank you so much, guys, for your input. It was very helpful and it was very fun to listen to. Thank you. So I will stop the recording here then. You all want to say bye.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, guys.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. I might see some of you again in other panels.
Probably
Absolutely.
not.
All right. Later, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.